Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Procurement Software Podcast. My name is James Meads and I will be your host. And today we're looking at one of the buzz topics of this year, which is, can intake and process orchestration solutions replace source-to-pay suites? Before we get in to tackle that question in detail, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just going through what is intake, how is process orchestration different or complementary to intake, and why do you need both of them together? Look a little bit around where does source-to-pay potentially fall short compared to the new breed of solutions. Spend a little bit of time going through how intake and orchestration actually works from a tech perspective and what it can do. And then we'll tackle the big one, which is, will these solutions have the potential to replace traditional source-to-pay suites? If they do, in what form will that take and how quickly could it happen? So what is intake? Well, intake is the initial step in the process. It's, if you will, the more upstream part of the whole procure-to-pay process. So before a requisitioner wants to actually go in and make a purchase, they want to know, okay, how do I go about this? Who do I need to speak to? Who's the buyer? What documents do I need? What options are there? What approved suppliers are there within the organization? So intake is where or requirements for goods and services can be received, assessed, and then the user can be pointed in the right direction as to how they need to go about making the purchase or satisfying the request to be able to go out and buy something. So whereas a procure-to-pay or a source-to-pay solution really only starts at the outset of actually keying in a purchase requisition into the system, intake really is critical early procurement involvement, both for strategic spend, but also for more routine tactical purchases as well. And that in turn sets the stage for the next process, which is then the effective orchestration of that, monitoring and walking that request through the whole system, depending on the complexity of what it is that needs to be bought. So an effective intake process really just means that adherence to policies and better compliance is more likely to happen if you have a process that's user-friendly and effective, sort of more upstream from the purchase requisition. And it also improves the end user's experience. If they've got a very user-friendly front end that they can effectively use human-centric language to ask questions, okay, hey, how do I do this? It's going to be a lot easier to drive compliance than if you've got quite a rigid system that you can only key purchase requisitions into, or God forbid, you're having to do it through your ERP, which is even worse. So how is process orchestration then different to intake, or how does it complement intake? Well, it kind of goes hand in hand. So if you've got an intake solution as a standalone solution, but then there's nothing sort of further downstream, it's effectively useless in that sense, or at least it's extremely flawed, because unless you've got a downstream process to orchestrate the other processes that come further on down the line, you're going to then get stuck in siloed workflows then, which is often the reason why procurement fails or doesn't get high levels of user adoption or high levels of spend under management, because, the processes in terms of dealing with procurement can often be quite rigid or be quite clunky. So it effectively, and this is especially the case in large organizations, process orchestration enables lots of different best of breed technology or lots of diverse applications from other functions to be able to communicate with one another. If you think about, for example, something like supplier quality or ESG, those applications and those systems typically don't communicate to existing purchasing or procurement software, especially in the more sort of procure-to-pay, source-to-pay side of things. So it really enables lots of different technologies to function together seamlessly and enables otherwise disjointed processes to be much more joined up and automated and feel like a natural flow between one system to another in terms of different applications, different sets of data, and different users. And this strategic alignment, if you will, bringing all of these systems and departments together really enables better integrity of data. It enhances opportunities to have greater interdepartmental collaboration, better stakeholder relationships, ultimately, if we're looking at it in procurement parlance. And it maintains the transparency from where the initial purchase request comes into the system right the way through to final payment and record keeping, but with all things like supplier quality, parts approval, ESG assessments, inventory management, all of that orchestrated within there too. So I guess what you're then saying is, well, okay, then why do we need it? Give me some examples or give me some use cases, or where do existing source to pay suites perhaps fall short? So in a nutshell, intake and process orchestration solutions are much more adaptable and malleable than source to pay suites are. Intake and process orchestration allows you to custom design and custom make your workflows and to design those workflows yourself using no-code technology in a way that legacy source to pay suites can't or are very restricted in terms of what they can do. And then if you add to a better user interface and user experience more generally, this new generation of tools which can natively leverage AI that's built into it in a more modern tech stack, it's going to give you greater transparency of your end-to-end procurement processes. And it also increases the amount of automation opportunities that you're going to have for transactional and administrative processes, especially if you need to punch out from your source to pay suite or procure to pay suite into other systems. If you need to automate a process to say, copy and paste that data from this system into ERP, or automate the sending of an email to a supplier, if this, then that type of scenario, it enables you to do that much more effectively than with existing source to pay technology. It has fundamentally a lot more functionality than the basic RPA, robotic process automation capabilities in the procure to pay cycle. And it's really hard now. If there was a new source to pay solution that would come onto the market, it's very, very difficult for me to envisage that they would bring that solution onto the market without having some type of intake and process orchestration capability already built in. Because without that, unless you're marketing it to a very small business, but if you're focusing on enterprise software, let's just assume that, without having intake and process orchestration, it's going to be very difficult to differentiate a Me Too source to pay suite from other competitive solutions that are out there now. Just because the amount of workflow acceleration and decision-making enhancement and empowerment of procurement teams that these type of solutions can bring that were previously out of reach, I just don't think that you could bring a source to pay solution now onto the market and not have that technology already baked into it. Whereas if you look at the legacy players, they're sort of having to scramble and try and bolt on solutions or work in some cases with intake and process orchestration solutions to be able to bolt on to enhance their product. If you look at the likes of SAP, Ariba and Coupa, for example, that have marketplaces, they allow you then to be able to integrate with something like a Zip or an Oro or a Tonkean, to be able then to bring that technology and leverage that technology within what is essentially technology that's 10, 15 years old in a lot of cases. So what are the differences between some of these intake and orchestration solutions that are out there? How does it actually work? Well, I see it fundamentally being split into two pretty distinct buckets. So bucket one are what I would call the intake to pay solutions. And they are essentially a more modern version, shall we say, of source to pay or procure to pay. But they just go further upstream with what they offer at the pre-requisition stage. And they also enable other systems to talk to them. That's the process orchestration part of it. Examples of these type of solutions would be Zip, Omnia, and Pivot on the one hand. And then you've got the second bucket, which are what I would describe as being more middleware process orchestration tools that really then complement some of the existing source to pay players. So these types of tools would generally sit on top of existing technology, and they are built more with the idea of being, I guess, a user-friendly front-end layer of technology that would be like the front-end UI to either an ERP system or some of the legacy source-to-pay tools such as SAP Ariba, Coupa, Jagger, iValua. And the examples that I would give in this bucket would be Oro Labs and Tonkean, and to some extent perhaps Upstream as well. And their marketing spin is really that they enhance rather than replace the source to pay or the source to contract suite. So I really see a place for both of these buckets within the environment, but it really depends on the type of company that you're working in, the maturity of your procurement organization in terms of what you would potentially go for as being the right solution for you. So if I'm looking at the question, is there a place for intake and process orchestration software and source to pay software as well? I think the answer to that question is almost certainly yes, but I don't think there is a place for both of them in more greenfield environments. I think if you're going into a greenfield procurement role with no legacy technology in place, no digital solutions other than perhaps an ERP system that's already in place, I don't really see why you would need to go out and buy a legacy source to pay suite. I think you could probably, a little bit like African countries, skipped landline phones and went straight to mobile. If you're looking at this from a blank slate in terms of being able to digitize your procurement completely greenfield and go straight to the latest technology, in that case, you're probably going to go and buy one of the first buckets solutions that I mentioned, an intake to pay solution like a Zip or an Omnia or a Pivot, because you don't need legacy technology on top of that. An intake to pay solution can do, some modules are fairly light touch, but it can do pretty much everything that you would need. It has the intake capability, it has the process orchestration capability, but it also has the procure to pay, the sourcing, in some cases also the contract management functionality that you would typically get in one of the older legacy source to pay, source to contract suites. So you probably then can find a one size fits all product that can do all of that. Whereas if you're working in what I call an old economy or an established business with a mature procurement function, I don't really see intake and process orchestration solutions eating the existing source to pay players in that environment. Because if you've got one of these suites already in situ and you've been using it for a number of years and it very much forms the bedrock or the foundation of your procurement technology stack, it's going to be a lot more difficult to rip that out and get rid of it. It's unlikely that you're going to deviate from that suite as being the foundational backbone of that tech stack. It would just require too much upheaval to be able to do that. And no CPO or CFO in those organizations is going to hold their hands up and say, yeah, we wasted $2 million on a legacy source-to-pay suite. Now it's old hat technology and we need to rip it out at sunk cost. I just can't see that happening. So maybe they will go for one of the second bucket of software, these more middleware process orchestration tools like an Oro or a Tonkean or an Upstream. But I don't think that they're going to rip out existing source-to-pay technology and completely place it with an intake-to-pay solution. So I certainly think the legacy source-to-pay suites are pretty safe in these types of companies. But where I do see them suffering is I just don't see them being able to get a foothold in some of the new economy businesses. I think they will go straight to these new generation tools. If you've not got any legacy tech, then you're looking at a complete blank slate. Would you buy a DVD player or would you just jump straight to streaming movies on demand? I think I know the answer, right? So I think legacy source-to-pay suites are going to struggle to maintain or build relevance in the new economy or in rapidly growing businesses or in greenfield digital transformation environments. The intake-to-pay solutions, I think, are really going to thrive here, and they will potentially replace the need for source-to-pay in this type of environment. So to conclude, I don't see any real danger to the existing players, the big suites, when it comes to large enterprise businesses in established, perhaps quite conservative industries. I do see them suffering or maybe struggling when it comes to selling into the mid-market because they're just too cumbersome. They're just too costly. They take too long to implement. And also, as I said, in greenfield environments and in tech companies, I also see them losing relevance too. So I don't think that intake and process orchestration necessarily is going to eat source to pay and make them completely disappear from the market. But I do think that they are going to make an inroad into their market share and that some of these legacy source to pay suites lose relevance in certain industry sectors and especially in the mid-market and for SMEs as well. Hope that was helpful. If you enjoy our content, then please do hit the follow button on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to us. It does help us to reach more people. And if you want to grab a copy of all of the different solutions that are out there within this space, we've got tech maps that cover both SME, mid-market and enterprise, where you can download all of the logos in all of the different categories on one PDF file. Just head to store.procurementsoftware.site and download the ones that you want to grab completely free of charge today. I will link to each of those tech in the show notes to this podcast. Thank you very much for listening. I will catch you again the same time next week. Until then, be productive and disruptive and take care wherever you are in the world. Bye for now.